Okay, so I don't know about everybody else, but I love reading as a kid, and I think that love of reading lasted until I started high school. Once I was forced to read, to write papers about it, to read books that I didn't even enjoy reading, it really just turned off the whole idea of reading for me. And so I just stopped reading altogether, I think up until college. Now that I'm an adult, I refound my love of reading, and I hate the fact that I ever stopped. And now I feel like I have all these books that I have to catch up on. And if you're like me and you had that long break of not reading, it may be hard to just find the habit to start reading again. It's so easy to just push off reading because, like I said before, we were all just forced to read, forced to write papers, and I felt like reading was equivalent to a chore. So how do you change that mindset and make reading fun again? So what exactly got me to read again? I heard someone say once that an average book is about 300 pages. And if you read 10 pages a day, you'll finish that book within the month. So in a year, you'll read 12 books. And I thought, that seems pretty easy. 10 pages a day, that's definitely achievable and doable. So why don't I just start this habit of reading 10 pages a day? And so that's exactly what I did. And ironically, the first book that got me back into reading is this book, Atomic Habits. Probably already see this book everywhere because it is that good. So the author talks about choosing to build on small habits every day. And one thing that really resonated with me when reading the book was how he talked about the phases of an ice cube melting. He talks about how this ice cube doesn't change its form from an ice cube to water until it reaches a certain temperature. And within 1 degree, the ice cube starts melting. So he questions, what if you were just one temperature or one habit away from being where you want to be? And so for me, I wanted to be a reader. I wanted to absorb information. I wanted to get out of my head, and I wanted to find a healthier habit of reading rather than scrolling on my phone 24/7. So while reading that book, I followed the mentality of reading one chapter a day, which is about 10 to 20 pages. So I started off reading a lot of self-help books that were New York Times bestsellers, and that really got me in the momentum of reading and building that habit of reading X amount of pages every single day. And I will say I did end up getting a little demotivated to read just because once you start reading all of these self-help books, they end up really saying the same things, and I felt like I was just repeatedly reading the same book over and over again. Like I didn't really start reading per se until I switched over to fictional books. So that brings me to my first tip, which is to find a genre that you're interested in. Whether it's YA, mystery, horror, fantasy, or even nonfiction, just find a book that you are genuinely interested in reading about because that will keep you motivated to keep reading. Like I said before, self-help books are just not for me. I feel like I was reading just the minimum amount, which is one chapter a day for me. Whereas when I switched over to fictional books, I just cannot stop reading. I feel like I could sit all day just reading because every page that I've been reading in my fictional books have been page turners. I just found myself actually wanting to read rather than it being a chore for me. So pick up a book that interests you because that's going to keep you reading instead of having to force yourself to read. And that's not to say that you can't read a variety of different genres and that you have to stick to one genre for the rest of your life. No, you can continue to switch it up as long as it continues to interest you. My second tip is to find a time that works for you and dedicate that time to reading. I feel like an excuse I hear all the time is that I don't have time to read. But I feel like even the busiest people, like business owners or parents, they always find time to do whatever they want to do, and that could be reading. They set aside time in the mornings to read or when their kids are asleep, so there's no excuses as to why you can't read. So personally for me, I started my habits by reading about 15 to 30 minutes right before bed so that I can again build that habit of reading rather than spend the last 30 minutes scrolling on my phone and having extra screen time. So when you set that time for yourself, you're building that habit of reading, and before you know it, you're going to be addicted to reading and you're going to be reading all the time like I do. Okay, so third tip is to stack your habits. So is there something that you're already doing and something that is already a part of your routine and you could add a reading to it? So for example, I know some people who are morning readers. They eat breakfast and they have their coffee or tea and they read at that time. So if you're already making breakfast, if you're already drinking coffee or tea or whatever, that's already a routine that you set in place every single morning. So why can't you just add reading to a before or after or during breakfast coffee time? If you're stacking these habits together, you'll be able to know exactly when you're going to read again, whether it's before, during, or after breakfast. And that allows you to create a consistency of reading, which ultimately results in reading being part of your actual routine. Okay, so the next tip is to have your book accessible to you. So I think one of the hardest things to read is that, oh, my book is over there. I'm not gonna walk over there and get it. Always have the book near you at some point or wherever you choose to read. For example, I read at night, so I usually have my book by my bedstand so that I can easily read before I sleep rather than go on my phone. Because if it's somewhere else, I'm gonna give all the excuses in the world as to why I shouldn't be reading. Okay, so last tip is to pick a form of reading that works for you, whether it's a audiobook, a Kindle, or a physical book. Me, I'm pretty old school and I prefer a physical book just so I can see when a chapter ends or starts and how long the book is. But that just works for me. I know some people who like a Kindle because on the topic of accessibility, you can bring that Kindle easily anywhere. There's also people who don't necessarily have the time to read. They might be commuting or working all day and don't have the time to actually sit down and read. So sometimes you may just want an audiobook, and that's also a perfectly great way to absorb some information. So that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed learning some of the tips and tricks that allowed me to build this habit of reading every single day. It's been almost a year and a half of me starting to read again as an adult, and I thoroughly enjoy this new habit of mine. So hopefully this gets you reading as well. But until next time, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this. Okay, so last tip is to pick a form of reading that works for you, whether it's a audiobook, a Kindle, or a physical book. For me, I'm pretty old school and I prefer a physical book just so I can see when a chapter ends or starts and how long the book is. But that just works for me. I know some people who like a Kindle because on the topic of accessibility, you can bring that Kindle easily anywhere. There's also people who don't necessarily have the time to read. They might be commuting or working all day and don't have the time to actually sit down and read. So sometimes you may just want an audiobook, and that's also a perfectly great way to absorb some information.